3 minutes ago, behind the sealed doors of Kensington Palace, Prince William uttered words no one ever expected to hear, words that instantly shattered decades of royal assumptions. His voice was steady, but the truth it carried detonated like thunder through the monarchy. Princess Diana, the people's princess, had left something behind, something meant only for William's children. And for Prince Harry, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the reason why may be even more devastating. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The confirmation did not arrive through rumor or speculation. It arrived through authority. It came in the form of a quiet but unmistakable acknowledgement from the one man who had spent his entire life carrying both the crown's expectations and his mother's invisible trust. Those present inside that private royal briefing would later describe the moment not as emotional, but as chillingly precise. There was no hesitation in William's voice, no visible conflict, only certainty. The kind of certainty that comes not from impulse, but from obligation, an obligation forged decades earlier by a mother who understood that her final decisions would outlive her son's unity. Senior advisors sat in stillness, absorbing the weight of what had just been spoken. Some had suspected that Diana's private arrangements were more complex than publicly understood, but no one had expected confirmation like this. No one had anticipated the absolute nature of it, because this was not simply about inheritance in the traditional sense. This was about intention. This was about a deliberate, irreversible act that carried emotional consequences far deeper than material distribution. It was a message sent across time, delivered through her eldest son, and now impossible to ignore. Almost immediately, the ripple effect began. Quiet whispers moved through palace corridors, faster than any official announcement ever could. Private staff exchanged glances filled with disbelief. Advisors who had spent decades protecting the stability of the monarchy now faced a reality that threatened to reopen wounds many believed had scarred over long ago. The words had been spoken, and there was no taking them back. Diana had left something solely to William's children, not shared, not divided, solely entrusted to them, and in doing so, she had made a choice that excluded Harry completely. Palace aides would later struggle to describe the emotional atmosphere in that room. One would quietly say it felt heavier than grief. Another would describe it as colder than betrayal, because betrayal implied surprise, and deep down, some feared that this had always been Diana's intention, that she had seen something long before anyone else had dared to acknowledge it, that her final act had never been about fairness, but about protection. Protection of something she believed must endure beyond her lifetime, even if it came at the cost of breaking her sons apart. William himself did not present the confirmation as a personal decision. He presented it as fulfillment. He spoke not as a brother, but as a guardian of his mother's final will. He invoked her intent with quiet reverence, framing it not as exclusion, but as necessity. Those words carried a haunting clarity, because they suggested that Diana had anticipated a future where difficult choices would need to be honored without compromise, a future where William would stand exactly where he stood now, forced to acknowledge a truth that would alter the emotional structure of his family forever. Early leaks had hinted for years that Diana's private arrangements contained layers never publicly revealed. It was widely believed that both William and Harry would share equally in whatever she had left behind. That assumption had comforted many, reinforcing the idea that her love remained evenly balanced between her sons. But assumptions are fragile things, and in a single confirmation, William had shattered one of the monarchy's most deeply held emotional certainties. Something had changed. Or perhaps nothing had changed at all. Perhaps the truth had simply remained hidden until this moment demanded its release. The monarchy itself now faced a reckoning, not a public scandal, but something far more personal and dangerous. Because this revelation did not just redefine Diana's legacy, it redefined the emotional bond between her sons. It forced those closest to the crown to confront the possibility that Diana's final act had not been designed to preserve unity, but to secure continuity. And that distinction carried consequences no one could fully predict. Yet even as the palace absorbed the shock, one truth became impossible to ignore. William had not spoken impulsively. He had spoken because he believed the time had come, because something had reached a point where silence was no longer protection, it was avoidance. And to understand why William would confirm something so final and so devastating, we must go back to the one figure whose absence still controls everything, Princess Diana herself. Long before that tragic night in Paris, Diana had already begun preparing for a future she feared she might never see. But what she left behind wasn't simply wealth, it was intention. Hidden beneath her warmth and compassion was a quiet awareness of the storm her sons would inherit. And in her final private decisions, Diana made one choice that would only fully reveal itself decades later, a choice that would redraw the future of her family forever. Diana had always lived with a strange contradiction. She was adored by millions, yet she trusted very few. Her public life was defined by openness, but her private thoughts were guarded with extraordinary care. And as the pressures around her intensified, those closest to her began to notice a shift not in her kindness, but in her urgency. She had begun asking questions that did not belong to the present, questions about legacy, questions about permanence, questions about what would remain when she was no longer there to guide her sons herself. It was not fear that drove her, but clarity, a quiet realization that her role as their protector might one day depend not on her presence, but on what she chose to leave behind. In absolute secrecy, Diana reportedly turned to a handful of legal confidants she trusted with her life. These were not casual consultations. These were deliberate, layered conversations that unfolded over time, shaped by her evolving understanding of the monarchy's emotional and institutional fragility. She understood something few others did, that William was not just her son, he was the future king. And with that future came forces far beyond personal control, expectations that would reshape his identity, pressures that would isolate him, responsibilities that would test his loyalty not only to his family, but to the crown itself. Diana knew William's path would never belong entirely to him, and that knowledge weighed heavily on her decisions. But Diana's instincts reached even further. Her thoughts did not stop with William or Harry. They extended beyond them to children who did not yet exist, to grandchildren who would one day carry both her memory and her blood. She spoke in quiet terms about continuity, about protecting something fragile yet essential. In private correspondences, she hinted at fears she rarely expressed aloud. She worried that the bond between her sons, so strong in youth, might not survive. The pressures that lay ahead, that time, distance, and duty might slowly pull them apart in ways neither could prevent. And if that happened, she wanted safeguards in place not to punish, but to preserve. Diana reportedly described her intentions not as favoritism, but as protection. Protection of continuity, protection of stability, protection of a future she believed must remain anchored in a direct and unbroken line. She spoke of bloodlines yet to come, of responsibilities that would outlive her son's personal choices. Her legal preparations reflected this philosophy. They were not simple transfers of wealth, but layered protections designed to activate only when certain realities became undeniable. She created structures that would remain invisible until the exact moment they were needed, structures that would speak for her when she could no longer speak herself. What made Diana's preparations so extraordinary was not just their precision, but their restraint. She did not seek attention for them. She did not hint publicly at their existence. She allowed the world to believe that her legacy would follow the expected path, shared equally, guided by love alone. But beneath that assumption, she had already defined something far more complex. Her silence was not uncertainty. It was intention waiting for its moment. For years, those intentions remained sealed, untouched by time or circumstance. Even as William and Harry grew older, even as their lives unfolded in ways Diana could never have fully predicted, her final protections remained dormant, waiting, watching, bound not by emotion, but by conditions only she had foreseen. And now, decades later, those conditions had finally been met. The moment she had prepared for had arrived, and with it came the activation of a decision she had made long ago, not as a queen, not as a royal figure, but as a mother determined to protect what she believed mattered most. For years, those protections remained dormant, buried beneath silence, until Prince William became the man Diana had always prepared him to be. Prince William never asked to carry Diana's legacy, but from the moment she was gone, it became inseparable from his identity. While the world mourned her loss, William inherited something invisible, yet immense: responsibility, not just to the crown, but to her wishes. And as he grew into the future king, he began to uncover truths Diana had entrusted only to him. Truths that would one day force him to make an impossible decision, one that would change everything. In the quiet aftermath of Diana's passing, when public grief slowly gave way to private reality, William found himself standing at the intersection of love and duty. He was still young, still processing the loss of the one person who had made him feel understood beyond his title. But even in those fragile years, there were signs that Diana had seen something in him that went beyond his role as her eldest son. She had seen his strength, his restraint, his ability to carry weight without letting it consume him. And in time, as he matured, that quiet trust began to reveal itself in ways that would alter the course of his life. He was reportedly given early access to legal structures that had remained invisible to everyone else. These were not casual disclosures. They were deliberate, measured revelations designed to prepare him for a moment that might not arrive for decades. At first, the meaning behind them felt distant, almost abstract. They were words written by his mother, filled with intention but disconnected from immediate reality. He could acknowledge them without acting on them. He could carry them without allowing them to reshape his relationship with his brother, but their existence never left him. They lingered in the CK ground of his life, waiting. What made the burden heavier was not the legal authority Diana had entrusted to him. It was the emotional contradiction it created. William was not just the future king. He was Harry's brother. He was someone who had shared grief, laughter, and loss with him in ways no one else ever could. Acting on Diana's intentions meant confronting a truth that threatened to fracture that bond. And so William did what few people ever fully understood. He waited. He delayed. He hoped that time would make action unnecessary, that somehow the conditions Diana had feared would never fully materialize. But as William's own life evolved, as he became a husband and then a father, his understanding of Diana's perspective deepened in ways he had never anticipated. Holding his children, watching them grow, he began to see the world through the same protective lens she once had. He began to understand that legacy was not about fairness in the present, it was about safeguarding the future. Diana had not been thinking about immediate emotion. She had been thinking about permanence, continuity, stability, and that realization changed everything. Still, the decision remained suspended in uncertainty. Advisors reportedly reminded him of the irreversible consequences tied to activating Diana's final provisions. They warned him that once acknowledged, there would be no undoing it, no rewriting it, no softening its impact. William listened, but the decision was never truly theirs. It was his, and more importantly, it was hers. He was not creating something new. He was confronting something that had always been waiting. For years, he carried that knowledge in silence, allowing the possibility of reconciliation to exist, allowing himself to believe that circumstances might shift in ways that would render Diana's contingency unnecessary. But silence, he would eventually realize, was not protection, it was postponement. And postponement could not last forever, because eventually, reality would demand clarity. The moment of confirmation did not arrive suddenly. It arrived gradually, shaped by time, by distance, and by the quiet realization that the future Diana had anticipated was no longer hypothetical. It was real, and when that realization finally settled within him, William understood that his role was not to question her intentions, but to honor them. Not as a brother, not even as a king, but as the one person she had trusted to carry her final voice forward. Because while William carried Diana's trust quietly, Harry's path began drifting in ways Diana may have feared all along. There was a time when William and Harry were inseparable bound, not just by blood, but by shared grief. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the distance began to grow. Differences became disagreements, disagreements became silence, and silence became something far more permanent, What began as emotional separation eventually triggered something buried deep within Diana's final arrangements. Something that would activate only when the bond between her sons could no longer be restored. In the early years after their mother's passing, William and Harry were not just brothers, they were survivors. They understood each other in ways no one else ever could. They carried the same pain, the same questions, the same invisible absence that shaped their every step. William had always been the steadier presence, the one who absorbed the world's expectations without allowing them to consume him. Harry, on the other hand, carried his emotions more openly, more fiercely, as though refusing to let grief settle quietly into the background. And for a time, their differences strengthened their bond rather than weakening it. They balanced one another. They protected one another. I believed that nothing could ever truly divide them. But beneath that unity, subtle shifts had already begun. They were almost impossible to detect at first. Small differences in perspective. Quiet disagreements about responsibility. William's path was becoming increasingly defined by duty, while Harry's path was shaped by something far more personal, something driven not by obligation, but by escape. These differences did not explode into conflict overnight. They grew slowly, quietly, like cracks forming beneath the surface of something that still appeared whole. And with each passing year, those cracks deepened. Diana, long before any of this became visible, had anticipated the possibility of such fractures. Her legal structures had not been built solely on hope, they had been built on realism. She understood that emotional bonds, no matter how strong, could be tested by forces beyond anyone's control. That the monarchy itself, with its relentless demands, could reshape relationships in ways that even love could not prevent. Her final arrangements reportedly included contingency clauses, provisions designed to remain dormant unless certain emotional and institutional thresholds were crossed. These clauses were not punishments, they were safeguards. They existed not to react to conflict, but to preserve continuity if unity failed. William's advisors, those entrusted with protecting both him and the crown, were aware of these provisions long before they were ever activated. They warned him, quietly but firmly, that certain acknowledgements could trigger consequences that could never be reversed. Once activated, Diana's final intentions would move from possibility into permanence. And William understood the gravity of that reality, because acting on those provisions would not just honor his mother's wishes, it would confirm beyond doubt that the unity she had hoped to preserve was no longer intact. Harry, by contrast, reportedly remained unaware of the full scope of Diana's preparations. To him, her love had always felt unconditional, untouched by institutional calculation. The idea that her final decisions could carry structural implications tied not to emotion, but to continuity, was something he had never been forced to confront. And that unawareness created a fragile illusion, an illusion that time itself would eventually shatter. As Harry's distance from the monarchy became more defined, the emotional consequences rippled outward. Tensions that had once been contained within private conversations began reshaping the monarchy's internal dynamics. William did not react impulsively, he did not seek confrontation. Instead, he observed, he carried the knowledge Diana had entrusted to him with quiet restraint, waiting, hoping that circumstances might shift in ways that would render those contingency clauses unnecessary. But hope, he would learn, could not alter reality, because Diana's protections had never been designed to preserve sentiment. They had been designed to preserve continuity. They were not reactive. They were inevitable, waiting only for the moment when acknowledgement became unavoidable. And that moment, once it arrived, would not announce itself loudly. It would arrive quietly, with the weight of finality. And then, quietly, without ceremony or announcement, the sealed truth was finally opened. It wasn't opened in public. There were no cameras, no speeches, just a small room, a sealed directive, and the future king staring down at words written decades ago by his mother. As William read the document, witnesses said his expression never changed, but the room itself felt like it had stopped breathing, because what Diana had written wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't flexible. It was precise, and it left absolutely no room for interpretation. The directive had waited for this moment in silence, untouched by time, protected by layers of discretion that ensured only one person could bring it to life. William had known of its existence, but knowing something exists and confronting its reality are not the same. This was no longer abstract. It was no longer a distant possibility buried beneath legal language and maternal foresight. It was present. It was undeniable. And as his eyes moved across the words his mother had left behind, the full weight of her intention settled upon him with a clarity that could not be softened. Those present understood immediately that this was not an ordinary inheritance. It was not structured like a traditional bequest, where assets could be negotiated, adjusted, or shared through mutual agreement. Diana's directive had been constructed with deliberate permanence. Her words reportedly named only one line William's direct descendants. There were no secondary provisions, no alternative pathways, no conditions that allowed for reinterpretation. She had not left room for negotiation because she had not intended for negotiation to exist. Her decision was absolute. Her language emphasized continuity above all else. She did not frame her intentions in emotional terms, but in structural ones: protection, permanence, stability. These were the principles embedded within her words. She had not written as someone uncertain of the future. She had written as someone determined to shape it. Legal advisors present during the reading confirmed that the directive carried full authority, unchanged by time or circumstance. It existed outside of opinion, outside of influence. It could not be amended, diluted, or redistributed, not even by William himself. His role was not to alter it. His role was simply to acknowledge it. And in that acknowledgement, something irreversible occurred, because Diana had designed her directive to activate not upon her death, but upon William's recognition of its necessity. It had waited, dormant, until the moment her eldest son understood that her foresight had not been theoretical, it had been inevitable. Once he acknowledged it, the directive became binding. Not symbolically, legally, emotionally, permanently. In that moment, William reportedly understood what the document truly meant, not just for himself, not just for his children, but for Harry. Because Diana's words did not merely grant something to William's line, they excluded all others. The absence of Harry's name was not an oversight. It was intentional silence, and that silence spoke with devastating clarity. It confirmed that Diana had made a choice defined not by equal distribution, but by focused preservation. Her love had never been in question, but her final act had not been guided by emotion alone. It had been guided by vision. The document itself became more than legal instruction. It became a message sent across decades, a message Diana had trusted only William to deliver. It represented her belief in the future she had seen long before anyone else could accept it, a future where continuity required certainty, where hesitation could not exist, and where her eldest son would stand exactly where he now stood, holding her final truth, knowing it could never be undone. But the true shock wasn't just what Diana gave it, was what she deliberately withheld. For Prince Harry, Diana was more than a mother, she was his emotional anchor. Her loss shaped him in ways the world would never fully understand, which is why the revelation hit with such devastating force. Diana hadn't forgotten him. She hadn't overlooked him. She had made a conscious choice, and that choice spoke louder than any explanation ever could. The silence surrounding her decision became its own form of truth. Harry had always carried Diana differently than William. Where William internalized her legacy as duty, Harry carried her as refuge. She had been his protector, his shield against the emotional isolation that came with being born into a system that often demanded obedience over vulnerability. In her presence, he was not the spare, he was not secondary. He was simply her son. That truth had grounded him through the darkest chapters of his life. And because of that, the idea that she would intentionally exclude him from something so permanent felt almost impossible to reconcile with the love he had always known. Yet the directive did not leave room for reinterpretation. Diana's exclusion of Harry was not a legal technicality. It was not an accidental omission hidden within complex language. It was deliberate, absolute. His name was never mentioned, not as a beneficiary, not as a symbolic presence, not even as an afterthought. The absence itself became the message, and in that absence, Diana's intention became painfully clear. She had not acted impulsively. She had acted with purpose, guided by a vision that extended beyond immediate emotion into something far more enduring. For William, the realization carried its own quiet devastation. He had always seen himself as the bridge between his mother's wishes and his brother's heart. He understood the weight of her trust, but he also understood the emotional cost of honoring it. He reportedly wrestled privately with what the directive truly meant, not just legally, but personally. Because to acknowledge Diana's intentions was to accept a truth that would forever alter his relationship with Harry. It meant accepting that her final act had drawn a line neither of them could erase. Within the monarchy, the emotional consequences were immediately understood, even if never openly spoken. This was not simply about inheritance, it was about identity, about belonging, about what it meant to be chosen and what it meant not to be. Diana's directive reflected long-term strategic thinking, a belief that continuity required certainty. She had focused entirely on William's future line, not because she loved Harry less, but because she believed her legacy needed to follow a singular path. That decision, while deeply personal, carried institutional consequences that would ripple across generations. The revelation permanently altered the emotional structure of the royal family. It introduced a finality that could not be undone by conversation or reconciliation, because Diana's directive existed outside of present relationships. It existed in permanence, and permanence does not bend to emotion. It does not adjust to regret. It simply remains. For Harry, the silence within that document may have been louder than any explanation could ever provide. It forced a confrontation not just with his mother's absence, but with her final certainty, a certainty that redefined his place within the legacy she left behind. And for William, it reinforced the role he had never asked for, but could never escape: the role of guardian, of executor, of the one entrusted to carry forward her final will without hesitation. Because in the end, Diana's decision was never about the present moment. It was about the future she believed must endure, regardless of emotional cost. But what Diana left behind was never just about inheritance, it was about legacy itself. This wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about property. It was about something far more powerful, something Diana believed must survive beyond her lifetime. Her final gift was never meant to comfort the present. It was meant to secure the future, and by entrusting it solely to William's children, Diana ensured her influence would continue shaping the monarchy, long after her voice had been silenced forever. What Diana left behind was not measured in currency or possessions. It was measured in permanence, in continuity, in the quiet but unbreakable thread that would carry her presence forward through generations she would never live to see. She understood something few ever truly grasped: that legacy is not about what is held in the moment, but about what endures when the moment has passed. Her final directive was not an act of division. It was an act of preservation, a way to ensure that her influence would not fade into memory, but remain embedded within the very structure of the monarchy itself. By naming William's children as the sole inheritors of her final gift, Diana was not simply acknowledging their existence, she was defining their importance. She was anchoring her legacy directly into the future of the crown. Her grandchildren became more than descendants. They became the living continuation of her will, the carriers of a vision she had shaped with careful foresight. Through them, her voice would continue to resonate, guiding decisions, shaping outcomes, and reinforcing the continuity she had fought to protect. It was her way of ensuring that her presence would never truly disappear. This decision elevated William's role beyond that of a son honoring his mother's memory. It transformed him into something far more significant: the guardian of her lasting influence. His confirmation did not create Diana's legacy. It activated it. It brought into motion a structure she had built long before the world understood why it would be necessary. In that moment, William became the bridge between her past and the monarchy's future, not by choice, but by trust. Because Diana had believed, with unwavering certainty, that he would carry her intentions forward exactly as she had designed them. The emotional power of this decision reshaped the internal dynamics of the royal family in ways that could never be fully undone. Legacy, once activated, does not negotiate. It does not adjust itself to ease discomfort or repair emotional fractures. It simply exists, shaping the future in quiet but undeniable ways. Diana's legacy now lived exclusively through William's line, bound to the continuity of the crown itself. It became inseparable from the monarchy's future, woven into its structure with a permanence that transcended personal relationships. What made this reality so profound was not just the exclusivity of her gift, but the clarity of her vision. Diana had not left behind uncertainty. She had left behind direction. She had ensured that her influence would remain active, not as memory, but as presence. Her grandchildren would carry forward not only her name, but her purpose, and through them, her voice would continue to shape the monarchy's identity, long after her absence had become history. William understood this. His confirmation was not simply an acknowledgement of the past. It was an acceptance of the future she had entrusted to him. It meant accepting that Diana's final act had permanently altered the course of the royal family, that her influence would no longer exist as something remembered, but as something actively guiding what came next. And now, with William's confirmation public, the monarchy faces consequences no one can reverse. Prince William didn't hesitate. He didn't soften the truth. He simply confirmed it, and in doing so, he fulfilled the final wish of the one person whose absence still defines everything: their mother. Diana's last decision wasn't just a legal act. It was a declaration about legacy, about continuity, and about who she believed would carry her forward. And now, with those words spoken, nothing inside the royal family will ever be the same again. The moment William confirmed Diana's final directive, something irreversible took hold, not just legally, but emotionally, symbolically, and historically. Her intentions, once sealed in silence, were now alive, active, permanent. They no longer existed as speculation or hidden possibility. They had become reality. And with that reality came consequences that would ripple far beyond William himself. Because Diana had not simply entrusted him with knowledge, she had entrusted him with activation. She had made him the one person responsible for ensuring that her final vision did not fade into ambiguity or compromise. What made this moment so powerful was the realization that Diana's influence had never weakened. Time had not diluted her presence. If anything, it had strengthened it. Her absence had given her final decision a kind of permanence that could never be challenged or reshaped. Her words now existed beyond debate, beyond emotion, beyond reconciliation. They had become a foundation upon which the monarchy's future would stand. And through William's confirmation, that foundation was no longer hidden. It was visible, undeniable, and unchangeable. For William's children, the weight of that legacy now rests squarely on their shoulders. They are no longer simply descendants of a future king. They are the chosen inheritors of Diana's lasting intent, her belief in continuity, her commitment to preservation, her final act of protection. All of it now flows directly through them. They carry something far greater than inheritance. They carry responsibility. Responsibility to represent not just the monarchy, but the vision Diana believed must endure. And though they may not yet fully understand it, their lives will forever be shaped by the choice she made long before they were born. For Harry, the emotional consequences exist in a space far more difficult to define. His exclusi on does not erase Diana's love, but it does create a permanent fracture in the structure she left behind. It establishes a boundary that cannot be crossed, not through emotion, not through reconciliation, not through time itself, because Diana's final decision was never meant to be temporary. It was meant to endure, and endurance, by its very nature, does not adjust itself to soften pain. The monarchy itself now moves forward under the quiet authority of her final will. Every future step taken by William and his children carries the echo of her intention. Every decision shaped by their leadership reflects the continuity she fought to preserve. Diana's final act did not end with her death. It extended beyond it, embedding itself into the future she would never personally witness. Her voice remains present, not in memory alone, but in direction, in structure, in permanence. And for William, the role he was born into has now reached its most profound transformation. He is no longer just the future king. He is the guardian of Diana's final truth, the one entrusted to carry her intentions forward without hesitation or doubt. His confirmation did not create her legacy, it completed it. It ensured that her final act would remain exactly as she intended, untouched by uncertainty or compromise. Because even in death, Princess Diana didn't just leave behind memories. She left behind a future she alone had the power to define. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.